Good morning, everyone. This webinar is sponsored by ShareVault, the innovation leader in virtual data rooms for due diligence. My name is John Badger, and I'm the VP of Marketing and Product Management here at ShareVault. I'd like to thank you all for joining our webinar today. This webinar is number 7 in the ShareVault webinar series, and today's topic is maximizing value for a successful acquisition. The presenter today is Kevin Scott of Centaur Partners, a boutique investment bank offering over 60 years of combined experience in M&A and business development. Kevin has a 15-plus year track record in M&A, venture capital, secondary investing, and portfolio management. He leads Centaur's transaction readiness advisory services offering. If you look through our previous webinars, available for viewing on our website, you'll see 2 previous topics pertaining to different aspects of sell-side M&A. You can watch those webinar recordings right from our website. Today's webinar is focused on sell-side transaction readiness. Kevin will describe a number of reasons why readiness is so vital to maximizing value. In the end, he'll recommend getting started with setting up a data room for online due diligence as part of that preparation. You might think that this is an expensive piece of advice, but ShareVault has a special offering called ShareVault EverReady, a low-cost, easy to set up data room that you can get started with right now so that you're ready to get started with due diligence when the need arises. In fact, we began offering ShareVault EverReady specifically to promote the best practice of transaction readiness. And to make ShareVault EverReady even more affordable, we have a special promotion for this webinar. At the end of the webinar, we'll be giving you a code that you can mention to your ShareVault salesperson to get a 25% discount on your first 6 months. So be sure to stay right to the end. During the presentation, your individual audio will be muted in order to minimize background noise. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation, and you'll be able to submit questions via the question box located in your control panel. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce Kevin Scott from Centaur Partners, who will begin the presentation.
John, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you at ShareVault headquarters. And just to pique the audience's interest at the beginning here, I wanted to have a couple comments about the current M&A environment. And even before I do that, I will say that the discussion today is oriented towards technology M&A, which is most of our backgrounds here at Centaur, but the advice we'll be giving absolutely applies to any type of transaction, whether it's an M&A, it could be a financing, it could be a refinancing, it could be a corporate spin-out, it could even be the sale of your house or the sale of your car. The lessons apply to all the situations. So in terms of the current M&A situation today, corporate America is holding over $2 trillion in cash at the moment, which is an all-time record. And what they're waiting for is productive ways to invest that. And part of the reason why the balance is so high is because interest rates are low. But these corporate entities are also very active to pounce on acquisition opportunities and have been. Secondly, I've put 498 IPOs in registration. This is as of September 30th of this year. And that's a 10-year high watermark for IPOs. And in talking to our investment banking colleagues, they will tell you that there is an additional 400 to 500 companies in what they call the shadow IPO. They're trying to decide whether to go IPO or M&A. And then thirdly, I listed Google's M&A pace here. Google here in the Valley is looked at as a bellwether for M&A activity. And there was an article just this week about where they are in terms of their transactions. Last year in 2010, Google completed 48 acquisitions, which is a pace of 4 deals per week, 48 last year. So far in 2011, Google, through 9 months, has made 57 acquisitions. So they're doing better than an acquisition a week. Now, just a quick backgrounder on Centaur. The first slide here says 20 years of, that's 20 years per professional here. So we come from a really complete background of M&A from a buyer and a seller standpoint. We also have professionals that are CFOs of companies or former CFOs, venture capitalists, investment bankers, and board members of private companies. So we really have pooled together the experience from all the angles in a deal. And there's a reason why we created this practice, and it really is to apply the lessons we've learned from a selling company standpoint. And if only we knew what we knew back in the days when we were selling companies. And so we've prepared these slides today to help you all think about what we call the gold standard of readiness for your business. And me specifically, I'll just jump down to the bottom there. I'm a MBA from Kellogg Graduate School of Business out at Northwestern. My formative years were at a startup software company, which went through an IPO and then an M&A, kind of a reverse order. I spent 10 years at PwC working in their M&A group, mostly on the buy side. We did all sizes of transactions across industries and a lot of international work. And then 10 years at 3i Venture Capital, which is a London private equity business, where I invested in over 15 companies. Most of those we've managed through sales into the ecosystem, and 20-plus board seats. 2 years ago, I spun out about 12 companies from 3i to create Maywood Capital, again, and then working on exit strategy there. And earlier this year, joined Centaur to lead this practice. So to start with, there are a couple keys to maximizing value. And again, I refer to tech companies here. Tech companies, but again, applies, I think, across industries, are bought and not sold. And what does that mean? That means that you may want to sell your company, but there may not necessarily be a buyer for that company. And conversely, buyers are combing through lists of companies to acquire every day, and they're the ones that are driving the decision. And so the point I want to raise here is a philosophical one, and that is, if you're the owner of a business or if you're in the corp dev department of a business, you need to be ready when a buyer comes courting. And the third point here is, anybody ever sell your house? And if you think back to that time, if you have, there's a tendency to look at your house from an internal point of view. You're comfortable with the way the landscape looks, you like your appliances, the roof is 10 years old, but it works for you. You have the right configuration in terms of bedrooms, etc. The potential mistake there is that when a buyer comes, whether it's for your house, for your car, or for your business, they're going to apply their lens on your asset. And so throughout this presentation, the focus is you need to put yourself in the buyer or the external view to see how they would look at your house or your business. Now here's some data. I don't have too many slides like this, but this is a very telling set of statistics from PwC, my old employer, and they've pulled 452 recent sellers of businesses, and here are the results. And the top answer there in the light blue is that to answer the question, what would you have done to more favorably impact your deal? The top answer here is 37% would perform more seller due diligence or pre-sale preparation. Why you should care. This again is applying a lot of our direct experience over the years and talking to a lot of our colleagues in the business. And the facts are in transacting businesses that over 50% of the time, buyers will back away from a deal during some phase of due diligence. It could be even at the initial discussions of interest, it could be in the middle due diligence, or it could be towards the end. And so that's a pretty high rate of failure for deals. Secondly, of the deals that get done, 85% of those deals turn out to have a lower final purchase price at close than they did at the initial term sheet or letter of intent. And then finally there, even when the deal is closed, there's normally an escrow created, 15 to 20%. And of those escrow pools, and of the deals that close, 67% of deals will have purchase price adjustments post-closing, and these are always downward. So 2/3 of deals will take money even after a close, will take it out of the pot. And so we refer to being ready, and the importance of that is we want to learn from mistakes and address potential deal killers in advance so that you don't fall into that top bucket of 50% that don't get a deal done. Secondly, help make your deal move faster through the due diligence process. And two lessons that I have here, from a buyer's point of view or from an investor's point of view, we always said that time is the best due diligence because that allows the buyer or the investor to look at your company for just maybe a few more weeks or have a quarter closed to see how your forecast came out, or wait to see which key employees might be staying or might be getting cold feet and already leaving. So from a seller's point of view, from your point of view, time kills deals, and your goal should be to compress the diligence period as quickly as possible because time is not your friend. Now, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this one here, the blue team is the buyer's due diligence team, and internally at the corporations, they're known as the SWAT teams. And these guys, today, they don't mess around. They are all business, and they come, in fact, I was with a corp dev executive from a very large Silicon Valley company 2 weeks ago, and the term that he uses when they do due diligence is steamroll. They look to steamroll their targets so that they can flatten the value ultimately. And you're the seller often feels like they're the white team here, and you can see the ball is being dislodged. And so we don't want you to be in that position, and we want to try to help that situation. And so the buyers really care these days, and I've been in this business of M&A deals for almost 20 years, and there's been almost a seismic shift in the way buyers approach due diligence today than when they did 10, 15 years ago. And today, the buyer and their SWAT team will descend on every aspect of your business. They will have experts in every functional area, and they will bring in outside teams of experts if they need more bandwidth. And while they are inspecting your business, you as the seller are trying to run your business and deliver on the monthly or quarterly results, but you're distracted by the ongoing and quite overwhelming due diligence requests. So you're the seller. The buyer is battle tested. They're doing, as we saw in the case of Google, multiple deals a month. They know what they're doing. And the result is, and this is why we've created this practice, there's a mismatch today more than ever in the past. There's a mismatch of the buyer's resources and their due diligence teams and the seller's resources, because after all, the seller has not evolved nearly to the extent that the buyer has over the last 10 years. The final point here is that, as I said earlier with the house example, the buyer will make its own assessment of the health and hygiene of your business. And if they pass, you may never know exactly why they passed. And as I said at the beginning, buyers backed away from 50% of due diligence. Now, before we go to the next slide, I wanted to share with you some late-breaking news from a board meeting I was in, believe it or not, this morning. And we were working on I'll call it was a spin-out from a corporation that we would have acquired. It was a very exciting deal for us, and it literally caused us to have an emergency board meeting last week where we were throwing together all of our records and beginning to exchange them with a large corporate entity here in Silicon Valley. And so today, the CEO informed us that this morning the buyer had backed, or the corporation backed away from the deal, and the reason they gave was that they couldn't make the financial model work. But when we dug a little deeper, we we learned that the real reason that the deal fell apart was that the buyers, the sponsor of the corporation, was overwhelmed with at least 10 other deals they were working on, and this one just got buried in the pack, and they just dropped it. So that's the lesson that is learned every day in corporate America, and it's a reason you need to be prepared to go swiftly through any kind of a corporate transaction. And here's a slide on, this slide is already wrong. This shows the top technology acquirers of the last year. It shows Google at the top at 29, and I already told you that Google recently announced that they did 48 acquisitions last year. So it's fairly common for corporations not to announce every single deal. You could probably double all these numbers for the top acquirers here and have a better estimate. Okay, so getting directly to the key content today, we have gone through our collective experience. We've talked to bankers, lawyers, corp dev professionals at corporations, and we've talked to the folks that analyze escrow buckets and know what happens to reduce value after deal. And we've created and identified, actually, the top deal-killing traps in M&A deals. And here's a list. We're going to go through these one at a time, so we'll move to the first one. So the top deal-killing trap is what we refer to as validation of benefit to the buyer. And if you think back to the housing example I gave, if you put your house up for sale, you might have 20 or 30 cars drive by your house before the open house. And they might make an emotional decision right then and there with the curb appeal, whether they like it or not. And some will just drive on by because they don't like the neighborhood, they don't like the landscape, they don't like the color of the house. And you've just lost an opportunity to sell to them. The same is true with selling your company. In all circumstances, there is a sponsor, some type of a sponsor at the buying entity, and they will create a business case for buying your business and integrating it with the larger one. And if you don't understand what that business case is, and if you can't help that internal sponsor develop that and present it to their support team, the deal will never get off the ground. You will never have a chance to even enter due diligence. So this is the most important one, to understand your value in the hands of another company. What is the reason they're buying you? If you can't understand that, if you can't help the buyer articulate that, they won't get past go, and the deal will get lumped into that pile of where we experienced this morning, where it was looked at quickly and disposed of. So what we look for and what we help companies with is to help a management team get aligned on articulating their value proposition to a buyer or to a potential set of buyers. And I put an example, one of my personal examples in here, where we actually sold a business a year or two ago to Monster. And it was a business that, frankly, didn't have a lot of revenue, didn't have a lot of customer traction, but it had a very interesting technology that we knew Monster didn't have. And we spent, as a board, a number of weeks crafting that story so it would fit in perfectly with Monster. And it worked, and we got it sold to them. And I put another example of a lost sale that we had of another business to Quest Software, where we did just the opposite. We did not discuss the benefits of our company as a management team or as a board of directors. Instead, the CEO of our business went out parading what he thought was the value of the business. And by the time Quest got down to try to validate that, it really, there was no conformity from the management team, and that deal fell apart. So again, the impact of this on your deal, it's the most important hurdle, and it's a high probability of a deal killer, and there's no second chance. Number two, ownership of intellectual property. And this could go without saying, but certainly if you're a technology business, one of the most important aspects. And in the middle of the page there, I put out an example with Google, Android, Motorola Mobility, Apple, Microsoft. You pick up the paper any day, and there is an absolute swirl of litigation and claims and counterclaims around mobile device intellectual property. And it's becoming a very central offensive and defensive strategy for these large kind of conglomerates of technology buyers. And so what we have found to be true in almost all circumstances is that the top of the house, the CEO, or even the CTO, doesn't really understand what's in their code base, what they own, what they don't own, what they have rights to transfer or not, what third-party technologies may be in there. This has a real high risk to the timing of a deal because today the top acquirers will ask for an audit of your code base, and they will make sure that everything in your code, if you're a technology business, you have, as I said, the right to transfer it. It's yours. You have the right to develop it. And so what we recommend here is to do an audit of your own code before you even think about going out for a transaction. There are a couple companies, I'll list them for you. One is Palamita, which does a third-party and open source code review, and another is Black Duck. So understanding your code before potential buyer comes in is critical to a deal. Top deal killing trap number 3 is threat of litigation. Again, it should go without saying that this is a highly sensitive area to potential buyers, but time and time again we see due diligence processes that reveal litigation exposure that the selling company wasn't aware of. I put an example in here of Facebook, which is, again, a high-profile one, but it happens all the time. And if you saw the social network movie, you'll recall the Winklevoss twins that had a dispute with the founders of Facebook before the company became successful, and have sued for their rights there. And then this gentleman, Paul Siglia of New York, also has sued Facebook recently for, again, ownership dispute. And this comes back to cap table or ownership issues and also intellectual property issues. So if you don't take care of unresolved claims before a deal is announced, they're much more expensive to remediate during a due diligence process, and they'll delay and possibly kill a deal. And so our recommendation here is to review potential litigation or existing litigation with your attorney and see what you might want to take care of before you start thinking about selling yourself. The top deal killing trap number 4. This could also almost be number 2, really. It's not necessarily ranked in order of importance, but accounting exposures and conformity. And the main point here is that if your business is acquired by a public company, your business will have to face the scrutiny of essentially a public company audit within about 60 days of an acquisition. And so, again, the risk here is that any unidentified exposure in revenue recognition or bookings, etc., will directly reduce your deal value at least dollar for dollar. And other common areas that we see here are the net cash flow at close, and this gets back to your forecasting ability of cash. This includes commission tails. If you have longer-term contracts and no salesmen, this will be deducted from escrow. I put an example here in the middle of the page. This is from about a week ago, MF Global Holdings. This is the firm in New York that went bankrupt, and it was the former senator and governor of New Jersey, Mike Corzine, who was the head here. They went bankrupt, and in part because they were trying to sell themselves in the 11th hour, and the potential buyer, and this is from the paper, pulled away at the last minute because, and I quote here, their books are a disaster. We're trying to find out what the real numbers are. And so if you can't credibly present your financial picture to a potential buyer, they will have questions which will delay and possibly kill a deal. We'll move on. I'm not going to go through these at all, but I wanted to leave these with you since this presentation will be up on the ShareVault site in their archives, so you can refer back to this. But these are some common accounting questions that will come up in deals, and there's another page of these. And there is another page of these. So the point is here, accounting questions and accurate financial statements are central to determining value in a transaction, and the buyers are really professional at trying to find every nook and cranny of inaccuracy in your forecasts or in your reported financials, and they'll take that out pound by pound from your transaction value. So it's important to get ahead, understand what your accounting exposures are, and an easy recommendation here is if your company has not had an audit recently or ever, to have one before you begin to think about starting a sale process. Okay, top deal killing trap number 5 that we find, company agreements and exposures and risks with them. And one of the scary realizations in M&A due diligence is that buyers will require you to produce all your company agreements literally from the beginning of the formation of your company. So it could be vendor agreements, customer agreements, employee agreements, and they'll look to have a complete set of those to look to see that they're all signed and that you're not in default or out of compliance with any of them. And it's hard for a company that hasn't gone through a recent financing or transaction to completely have this area understood, because you're creating agreements all the time. You really need to stop, take an inventory, and look for any missing documents you may have. You might have to track down ex-employees, frankly. But again, the buyer will bring in their set of attorneys and their experts to make sure you have everything from the beginning of time in your data room and complete and signed. And they'll look in particular for items such as non-assignment or cancellation of a customer contract if your business is acquired, and again, if there is value associated with the contract and it's not transferable, or if they have a right to back out, that could reduce the value of a deal. If you have to go back and get consents for assignment, for example, this caused timing delays into the business, into the closing process. And by the way, it reflects poorly on the management, reflects poorly on your credibility if you have to scramble around to find documents, get them signed during the due diligence phase. So advice here is to look for, first of all, get all your documents together and hopefully get them uploaded into a data room such as ShareVault, and then also keep an eye out for non-standard terms, because they'll be reviewed in detail by your lawyers and your potential acquirers' lawyers. Top deal killing trap number 6, corporate governance exposures and risks. And this is particularly relevant for if there are any startup companies on the line today, if you've been through a series of preferred stock issuances, if you have, and again, I put Facebook and the cap table here, but anytime there's a board of director meeting, any of the minutes that are generated will need to be found and signed and posted up into a data room. We have 409A valuations, which are for the valuation of common stock options. Those have to be done at regular intervals now. That's been a change in the last couple of years. And again, all the agreements, all the corporate governance agreements have to have been found, located, signed, and make sure they're available into a data room. And I put another personal example here. When I was with 3i in 2008, we decided to sell 20 of our investments, 20 private companies. And we decided to do that in actually December of 2007. And by the time we started to look for investment bankers to help us, it was April of 2008. And it was then we decided to work, actually in this case, with ShareVault to establish a data room. And it took me, because I was leading this, from April of 2008 until about July of 2008 to find all the documents related to corporate, in this case, mostly corporate governance, because it was ownership of preferred shares and voting agreements and those types of things, plus the underlying corporate records for the companies, their financial statements and audits. It took from April of 08 to July of 08 to get that data room ready for the first buyer to take a look at it. And by the time we ran an auction and had a buyer ready with a proposal, it was September of 2008. And that was the absolute worst time to be trying to sell anything. And we didn't close our transaction until December 5th of 08. And I can unfortunately tell you that we took a real, a real hit in valuation because we were selling at a bad time in the market. And as I look back to the April to July time frame when it took us 4 or 5 months to get a data room uploaded, and what we would have had a much different value had we been able to go through that quickly. Okay, the final deal-killing trap, at least the final major category, is HR and employee exposures and risks. And again, this is one that comes up in every deal. I put an example. I'll just pick it up quickly. If you look at the middle, are your contractors really contractors, or are they employees? And this is an important one, especially for today's company that typically uses a lot more contractors than in the past. And they could be in the U.S., they could be in India or Ukraine, or they could just be contractors you use for flexibility. But Oracle, again, this is from this week, just announced a $35 million settlement because they actually had a lot of, I think they had over 1,000 what they called contractors that the courts determined were actually employees, and so they had to not only pay those individuals overtime and some penalties, but they had to settle with the authorities for $35 million. So again, you need to have all the records associated with your employee contracts. They have to be readily available, they have to be signed, you have to know what the implications are, particularly if it applies to any proprietary rights agreements from current and ex-employees. And God forbid if you have to find ex-employees during a due diligence process, because that can add significant time to getting the deal done. And we've seen it actually, if you can't find an ex-employee and get them to sign away their rights agreement, it could torpedo a deal. And finally, a buyer will almost always want to know who the key employees are and will they stay or continue with the new business. And so as the selling company, you need to understand who they are and have had discussions with them to explain why the deal is coming together and what might be in it for them. And you may have to work out separate arrangements with them so that they stay with the new company. Okay, so we just walked through 7 major categories that we find are the most responsible for slowing down or killing deals. But if you're familiar with the gentleman on the right here, that's Columbo, and as he was fond of saying, there's always just one more thing. And we walked through the 7 categories, but we'll give you an example. Most companies will have 100 or so page due diligence checklist, and there will be always more questions. I throw in an example here for you. We sold a company to IBM last year, and at the end of their due diligence process, we went into the data room history, because good data rooms like ShareVault allow you to look at who's been in there. There were 1,000 IBM employees that had scoured the data room over the 3 to 4 month due diligence process. So don't kid yourself if you think you have everything ready. But again, remember to go back to the external point of view. So just a couple final comments here on what you can do. And the first thing here is a self-assessment of value. How would your company look to a buyer today? Put yourself in the buyer's shoes and really understand the reason that a buyer would buy you. Secondly, initiate relationships with potential buyers. This could be done through your salespeople or at conventions. It could be done through investment bankers. It could be done a direct approach to a buyer. And if you don't have any direct avenues, then you can always use the public airways. It's very effective to put out press releases on what you're doing, what your successes are, what your product is offering. But anything you can do to initiate a contact with potential buyers will help you ultimately in achieving a sale. Talk to experts. So it's important to talk to either bankers or others that are familiar with who the buyers are, who's active, what metrics they're paying, what they're looking for, lawyers, accountants, HR, other experts to help you when a deal is imminent, to help get you ready. Get prepared, of course, is our mantra, and the central point is to evaluate the risk and exposure before the buyer does. And I've stressed it earlier, but it really is critical to your personal credibility to be able to represent your company quickly, without friction, and very professionally, so that the buyer doesn't get turned off early. And then the last point here is strive for a gold standard of readiness. And this could be done even in the absence of a transaction. All the points that we list here, you could and should do even in the absence of an M&A deal, because it helps you on a day-to-day basis know your company better and feel more confident in the legal and financial documents that you have. And in the middle there, I point out that in this day and age, every transaction will involve an electronic data room. We recommend that you take charge of that process. It works for internal collaboration as well, and it takes time, so we recommend getting that done even, again, in the absence of a transaction. So again, just kind of coming back to Centaur and what we do everything I just described. We help prepare companies for M&A due diligence, but again, it applies to any type of transaction. Could be financing, could be a spin out, and we help companies identify the traps in their business and help the seller's team look more credible in the eyes of the buyer. And so ShareVault, I wanted to come back because I have the personal experience. I'll just throw in a couple more comments. I was able to, I think, spend less than 60 minutes being trained with ShareVault, and I, again, personally uploaded and assigned, user preferences to over 30 or 40 different users of our system. I trained our secretary in less than half an hour, and as a very small team, we were able to manage the sale of 20 companies. Here's a summary. I'll leave you with that to look at your leisure.
Okay, so thank you, Kevin, for the outstanding presentation. Your experience and insight will be valuable for any company who is a candidate for a future acquisition. So we'll now have a short 5-minute demonstration by Denton Herbick, who's Regional Vice President of Sales here at ShareVault. And I'm going to go ahead and make him the presenter.
Okay, great. All right, we should be up to speed here. As John mentioned, I'm the Regional Vice President of Sales for ShareVault. I've been in the confidential document exchange area for about 7 years now. Been in IT for 15, companies I work for include Adobe and Citrix. So I have a strong background in document presentation and remote access. I'm going to show you a couple different things very quickly. I'm going to try to show you about 45 minutes worth of demo in about 4 minutes. So hang on tight. This is going to go fast. So the first screen I'm going to show, this is what a low level named John Den actually sees. And as you can see, if you look over here, you see the index structure. There's very little. He only gets to see the first real 4 data elements. He sees about 14 files. And that's all John really has access to. A couple nice things you'll see right off the bat. Document thumbnails. These are great. When you start to really look at a lot of different documents, the title of the document doesn't always tell you enough. And I have a lot of people who tell me that this just makes life easier. They don't dive into unneeded documents and that sort of thing. You'll also see that John only has access to PDFs, and we've done that on purpose. What we do at ShareVault is we take just about every document that you upload, about 300 different file formats, and automatically create a PDF mirror. That is because PDF is by far the best controlled document presentation method on the web. One of the other things we do to help your end users get around and navigate and find information quickly is do word search capability. You'll also see that there's a few things that they can do. They can do some Q&A, there's some preferences, and there's some help. If I had more time, I'd go into each one of them. At this time, I don't. Another nice thing is you also can add a significant amount of description with each document. This helps a lot with the due diligence process, alleviates a lot of the stress associated with questions continually coming in. You can start to add a significant amount of description and alleviate that. Now I'm going to show you the very same vault. This time we're going from Chrome to Internet Explorer. One of the cool things about our solution, we work very well on a lot of different platforms. You'll see in this very same repository, Den Herbeck, I'm an administrator, and I get to see actually the native file format. I get to see the entire index structure. I also have a number of tools to manipulate it. So for example, if you have a number of people uploading information to this, you can very quickly drag and drop and move things around. This is not a challenging process. No matter how poorly people upload information, you can fix it. And you will notice that some of the index is numbered and some of it is not. And you'll see that the numbers are automatically updated. You can even push and pull things around in the document level. Another neat feature that saves a ton of time and energy for the preparation of information is having the ability to have one document reside in many places as you would like. Classic example are Excel sheets and other things which may pertain to multiple locations or business units or have to do with a lot of maintenance. Rather than take the time used to separate it and create different documents, take that same live document you have internally, upload it, and then just have it permissioned to multiple areas, as I'm doing right now. Saves a ton of time, saves cost, administrative hassle, just really is an incredible feature. Some of the other things you get to see as an administrator, you could do serious due diligence or deep dive rather on who is looking at what, where, when, and how. So for example here, I'm looking at John Den, and I've noticed some of the files that he's gone into. I also see how long that he's been in some of the documents. I can also see the IP address. You get an absolute ton of information. You can know what is an individual looking at minutes before they walk into a management meeting. You don't have to be surprised by what they find. You also can help increase your shareholder value by starting to see what's in it for your buyer. Why do they want you so much? What are they looking at? And you can start to increase some value. As far as users and groups and permissioning, it's a very easy process. You create users, and then you simply select what you want them to see and the particular security level. It's that easy. On the last part I will show how do you upload information. And you will see this is in Firefox. I can build a due diligence or drag entire files from my desktop and automatically upload them in a matter of clicks. That was one click. Here's my second. And you'll see that it's creating the index structure. And all I have to do is hit publish. And that's about how simple it is to upload, permission, and create a repository that you always have control of. Does anybody have any questions? That's kind of my 4-minute demo, or my 45-minute demo smushed into about 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Denton, for the abbreviated demo, and make sure to contact us if you'd like to see a more in-depth demo. We can get one of our solution specialists to give you a remote demo. So now let's go ahead and cover the Q&A session. So I have some questions that have been submitted here. And so let's go ahead and take a look at the various questions. Here's a question, a good question. It says, what can be done to increase the deal pace?
Well, that's the name of the game, really. And the simple answer is to front load as much of this, what you know is coming down the road. You know, we know, you should know, we know what types of questions, what types of documents buyers will look for. It's basically everything about your company, as I mentioned at the beginning. And so you just need to ask yourself, do we have all the documents? Do we understand what our value is to a buyer? Do we have all the employee records? And ask literally almost every functional area to have all their records. You need to comb through every area I discussed, the accounting, litigation, the IP, so that when a buyer does come and want to initiate a due diligence process with you, you can essentially open the doors to your home and welcome them in, and everything's right there. It not only compresses the diligence time frame, it makes you as a seller look much more credible, frankly, to your new employer.
Okay, here's another question. Do you believe that companies should always be proactive in preparation for unsolicited offers, even if they're in organic growth mode? If so, most small to mid-sized companies don't have the internal resources to separately support sell-side due diligence. How do you rationalize this?
Well, that's a softball question, John. I mean, look, we'll go back to Google, and I know that you are all not technology businesses, but Google has acquired over, at this point, probably 60 companies this year, and I'll guarantee you those companies weren't all hiring investment bankers to try to sell to Google. In fact, probably none of them were. So the answer is yes, you are more apt to be bought at the buyer's timing decision than you are to try to sell yourself in your time frame. So you should be prepared. And I think the question about internal resources is an excellent one, and two ways to solve that. One, at the time of a transaction, if you're stranded, then you can hire a consultant like us, for example, to help. Better off, think about this well in advance, and you can stretch out the time 3 or 4 months. Use your internal resources to get it done well in advance when you're not under the gun, and you can supplement what capacity you need with outside consultants like Centaur or others.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Here's a question. Why will deferred revenue be written off if there are valid customer contracts in place?
Good question. I have my accounting partner answer that one directly.
The question really has to do with how much of the deferred revenue will transfer over to the buying entity, and there's some complicated sort of accounting and purchase accounting rules that apply there, and a lot of it has to do with how much of a deal that has been sold by the selling company, and there's some bookings or deferred revenue from that. How much of that's going to transfer to the buying company, and so then you have to look at what are the obligations that carry forward with the contract. and what is the assigned profit margin with those cost obligations. And looking at only those cost obligations plus the profit margin, that's the amount of deferred revenue that might transfer. So in the simple answer, that's the case. And so in many cases, 50 to 80% of deferred revenue doesn't transfer to the buying company. So if one of the big motivations in the transaction is revenue and profit transfer to the company, you have to be prepared that much of it won't transfer.
Okay, thank you, David. By the way, that was David Ron, who's a colleague of Kevin's at Centaur. He's also a director at Centaur who fielded that question, so thank you, David. Let's see. I have another question here is, why can't we just use the buyer's data room?
Well, I got to stop you right there, hard and fast. You'd never want to use the buyer's data room because if you do that, you virtually eliminate any possibility of an auction or competition in the deal. So that's an important reason. You always want to have your own platform to share data and, frankly, give the permissions to those that you want to look at it. Once you upload it to a buyer's data room, they have control of it, and they're not going to be willing or very willing to let other potential buyers look at your data. So it really hamstrings a sale process. I mean, competition is the primary driver of value to get incremental value in deals. And I mean, another sub reason there is just confidentiality. If they have control of what documents they can access and look at, it may be different from what you would want them to see. So I would in no case recommend using a buyer data room. But it's a caution. If you're not careful and if you don't have your own data room, and we've seen this happen, if you don't have your own data room and you begin a due diligence process, the buyer, if they're smart, will insist or will strongly insist that you use their data room because they have it up and running, and it's hard for you to turn that down unless you are ready to go up with your own solution.
Again, that's part of the ShareVault Ever-Ready solution, is that if you've got a data room in place, acquisitive companies are all about timing, so if it's in place, they'll go ahead and use the one that you've got set up already, and so you'll have that strategic advantage.
And another point there, I just have to say it, you look much better to a buyer, and ultimately there's somebody at the buying company, let's call it the VP of Corp Dev, that is trying to sell this acquisition to the internal steering committee. And the more confidence that person has in your business, the much easier he's going to be able to sell that upstairs to his organization. So if you come out with a data room that's organized, that's complete, that you have confidence in, it will remarkably increase the pace and the cadence of your deal and make you look a lot better in the process.
Okay, very good. Here's another one. How important do you see patents being in IP diligence of tech companies such as Google? Does it really depend on the nature of the buyer?
Well, like I said at the beginning, I think there's a real battleground taking place right now with IP, and it could be that some buyers, it may not matter. It could be a tech company, but they're really looking to buy your customer base, or maybe your revenues, or maybe your employees. Google, for example, oftentimes the IP really isn't completely developed, but they want the engineers that they can then put to work on their IP work. But if you do have IP, if you have patents, it's critical to have those well documented, understood, presented, because it could completely kill or block a deal. And just look in the papers today, there's a real battleground about offensive and defensive use of patents, and it's of critical importance to these large, fast-moving buyers.
Okay, well, we're right up here at the 1 hour mark on the webinar, and thank you very much for your attendance. I'd like to thank everybody here for attending, And also I'd like to thank Kevin Scott. And now one last important slide, and that is the Ever-Ready promotion. So the discount code that you'll want to mention when you speak to your ShareVault sales specialist is readiness. So you just mention that, and you'll receive a 25% discount off the price of a ShareVault Ever-Ready subscription for up to 6 months. So there were other questions that we didn't have a chance to get to, and as a repeat, just from a logistics standpoint, we will be answering those questions directly by email. We have the contact information for those people who asked questions and we didn't have time to address. So thank you very much for attending the ShareVault webinar.